Hello everyone. Today we are going to be installing the Raijintek Morpheus 8069 on the HP Omen OEM RTX 3080. To pair nicely with our cooler, we will be using two Silent Wings Pro 4 from Be Quiet, and here is their respective data. We will also need some adapters to convert the fan headers on the card to PWM. Well, let's go ahead and get straight into unboxing the main star of this show. Here on the top we have our thermal grease and our rubber fan isolation pads which go on top of the cooler. Then we have our thermal pads. Next we have our heat sinks for the VRM and MOSFETs. Then finally the fan mounting brackets and cooler mounting hardware. Then finally onto the cooler itself. With 12 heat pipes and quite a respectable fan density, this cooler is rated for 400 watts. To take down the GPU, I begin by moving the 5 screws that hold on the GPU fan shroud. Here was my first attempt to unplug these little PWM fan headers. If you can get these off now, it would make the takedown process a lot easier, but these connectors were just so stiff. Now we're going to go ahead and begin removing all of the screws holding on the back plate. This screw tracking was originally for me to reference back on, but I ended up throwing them all in a bag in the end anyways. And easy enough, the back plate's off. And supposedly this was a card from an unsold HP Omen, but with all that dust on there, who knows? Now we'll begin by unscrewing the radiator mount screws. To be honest, the reason I bought this card in the first place was to replace my GTX 1080 of 7 years, which finally died. This was the cheapest good-looking RTX 3080 I could find on eBay. And at the time that I bought it, and at the time this video is coming out, these can be found for around $440 to $450. Thanks COVID, and thanks Nvidia. Here I'm pulling on the PCB in a few places just to see if it's still connected to the bracket. Now we just need to apply a little upward force to break the cold plate off of the die, being held on by the thermal paste. And here we have attempt number 2 to unplug these fan headers. After bringing shame for my failure once again, now we're going to remove the 4 screws that hold on the I/O plate. now to peel the frame off of the PCB, or rather the MOSFETs and the VRAM. There's no active cooling on the VRAM on this card. Well, it's now or never. And let's just say, ladies and gentlemen, we got him. After a little inspection to make sure I didn't break anything, which fortunately I didn't, we can now set our bare PCB down. Did somebody say spring cleaning? Well, it's actually summer, and it's 96 degrees outside, so Well, go ahead and sit back, relax, and enjoy me cleaning thermal paste and thermal pad residue for the next 40-ish minutes. Using 70% isopropyl, I did spend some time scrubbing on these VRAMs, but I really couldn't get whatever that residue was off that well, so I just got them as clean as I could. I did find that, however, using the little scraper on the MOSFETs did quite a good job of scraping off most of the residue. Now that she's clean as I care to get her, let's go ahead and put these heat sinks on our MOSFETs. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I did not do the best job putting thermal pads on these two. Yep, you can see it wasn't quite center, but it'll be good enough for these guys. Also note at my thumb, I could have left a little bit more space on that bottom end. I was not able to mount one of the backplate screws at that hole. Also with these thermal pads that were much less sticky, I found it far easier to just use my fingers to position them where they need to be. Here, make note of the arrows on the brackets, as they need to be facing in this direction when they're mounted. For the NVIDIA mount of this cooler, also make note of which holes these standoffs go in. Also note that we will not be using the spacers provided, as those little plastic washers are for AMD specifically. Thermal paste was provided, but I did have some Cryonaut Extreme on hand, and I like Thermal Grizzly, so... There's really no need to spread it out here, but I just wanted to get a little even coating around the center. Finally, it is time to affix the cooler to the card. Now we'll just line up the stanchions with these holes, seat her down gently, and then start our spring screws before torquing them all down evenly. And now to take a look at our card with the fin stack on it. Now we're going to go ahead and grab our OnlyFans, unbox and prepare for mounting. We will not be needing any of the additional accessories that these fans came with. Not only do these rubber strips, which mount with adhesive onto the front face of the radiator, prevent the fans from rattling around as much, but it also puts them at the correct mounting height for the brackets that hold the fans onto the fins. I absolutely should have plugged these in before I mounted the heatsink on the card. Didn't think about it. But anyways, let's go ahead and get our PWM adapters plugged in. Here I'm just making note of which direction that the actual connector needs to be inserted. In this case, the side with the 4 pins needs to be facing away from the rest of the GPU. These case fans are 25mm wide, but just so no one calls me a liar. And now we'll grab our corresponding 25mm case fan brackets. To ensure that we're getting the maximum performance out of our fans, we're going to flip the switch on the back into the ultra high speed setting to make sure that we can hit our targeted 3000 RPMs if we need it. These fan brackets only mount in one direction. You'll get a better view of that here momentarily. Now we just need to tuck this little part of the bracket under the ledge on the fins. All tight and secure. One more time and a better view at how these brackets actually go. Here, I'm letting the fan closest to the I/O overhang a bit farther off the back of the cooler in hopes that a little bit of airflow will get to that rear MOSFET heatsink. We are so very close to being done now. We just need to remount our rear I/O plate, and we're going to reattach the back plate in order to do that. Using some generic M 2.5 hardware, we are going to use 2 washers on this side since these holes in the PCB are cut, just to have a little bit more secure of a mounting. And we are going to reattach our back plate. Now I'm just going to drop in this first screw to hold the corner in place while I try to attach the washer and then the little M 2.5 nut from the bottom using tweezers and some pliers. Now with these two roughly secured, I can go back and finish tightening them all the way. Now for the remaining 4, or rather 3 screws, we won't be using the washers because I'm afraid of the clearance to the actual traces on the PCB. So now that we've dropped in all of our screws, we're going to go ahead and put the nuts on the end. And this is why we decided not to mount that screw. There just wasn't quite enough clearance for the nut. But 5 screws should be strong enough to hold the weight of this, as it's actually a rather light cooler. Also, hopefully in January when some new processors come out, this card will be going into my half XB Evo. Now, let's admire our handiwork. Hey, it may look a little funky, but I like that our card is showing its HP Omen roots. And no issues with any of the mounting of any of these nuts, thankfully. Performance first, aesthetics last. And now for our test data. Bear in mind, this is absolutely no gamer's nexus. To begin with, we keep the PC case closed and in the same place on my desk. Now, for our benchmark, I've chosen Deep Rock Galactic because of the way it loads the GPU. I'm using 4K Ultra settings with no DLSS and no ray tracing, and an ambient temperature in my house from 73 degrees Fahrenheit to 75 degrees Fahrenheit during all this testing. On average, I'm seeing a temperature decrease of about 20 degrees Celsius across the GPU. And not only that, but the delta between the hotspot and the GPU itself has come down about 4 to 5 degrees Celsius as well. The memory, now that it's being actively cooled, will no longer exceed 82 degrees Celsius. And with this thermal headroom comes higher core clocks. To show you some actual in-game performance, I've decided to leave a little bit of gameplay at the end. That way you can look at GPU-Z and see the actual stats of the GPU. The video I captured using NVIDIA Shadowplay on the graphics card in its OEM configuration. I did record at 4K, and the video I recorded on the Morpheus 8069 configuration, I recorded at 1080. So there's probably a little difference having it downscaled versus recording at full native resolution.
Activated. Time to move on, team.
Nice.
Oh yeah.
Dude, we are fucking killing it.
Oh gosh, ammo.
Reloading.
Did I just use a power attack on a Mac turret? You bet your ass I did. You bet your ass I did.
You bet your sweet bippy.
I ain't one of them. You tree climbing halfwit.
Alright, it's about to go. You bet your sweet bippy I did.
What's that from?
Eddie.
From Ed and Ed.